A year ago, we made a video trying to make sense of the new reality we were plunged into on the 24th of February 2022. Back then, we talked about how the reality of oligarchs, Russian residents, relocatees, and businesses would change. But a whole year has passed since then, and a lot has happened during the year. Let's open this year with a similar video. We will try to answer the question of what Russia got out of its special military operation. The most materialistic acquisition after the 24th of February is the new territories. They can be felt, counted, and assessed, unlike the power and greatness of Russia. And if at this point of the video you're thinking of skipping it or preparing to throw rotten tomatoes at me, here is a disclaimer before you do so. We do not approve these so-called acquisitions of the land. These are just raw facts without assessing whether they are good or bad. These are not Russian territories. These are the areas that the Russian army has captured. First, we've got to lay out all the facts, look at their parameters, and only then relate to the situation. That's the very foundation of the broadly discussed critical thinking. So, if you think you possess such thinking, continue watching the video. Otherwise, go ahead and write down in the comments about how pro-Putin and propagandistic I am. So, last year, the DPR, LNR, and these plots of land, which I do not know how to name correctly, but the authorities call them Kherson and Zaporozhye regions, became part of the Russian Federation. The first question is, how stable are the borders of the new territory? Well, firstly, we need to update the map a bit here, because at the time of writing, Kherson is back in Ukraine. Despite the popular slogan,
Россия здесь навсегда.
Everything can change in the opposite direction, but so far the new territories in Russia look like this. The second question is, what areas has Russia acquired? So far it's gotten under 80,000 square kilometers, that's just a fact so far. To relate to these figures, you have to relate to how much it extends the boundaries of the empire. The total Russian land area was 17 million square kilometers, so it has increased its territory by 0.5%. Hey, researcher, what kind of manipulation is this? Russian land is like 80% uninhabitable due to climatic conditions. It is true that most of the Russian territory is either uninhabitable or partially habitable, although life is not easy even there. It used to be estimated that we have 29% of usable land alone. Now it is more often cited as 20%. Let's assume it's 20%. With 17 million square kilometers, we have 3.5 million square kilometers of living areas. This means that Russia has increased the usable area by 2.7%. On top of that, the acquired territories are rich in natural resources. That is not to say that Russia is a country that is severely lacking in hydrocarbons, but if you look in the abstract and leave everything else out, it is a plus for the Russian economy. As you can see, the territories are rich in coal, metal, gas, and oil. Experts estimate that Ukraine has lost this much mineral wealth. But Ukraine has already regained some of what it had lost. Nevertheless, the so-called acquisitions remain. But how significant that loss is? Well, it is a different matter which requires a separate video, but here are just a couple of examples. We know from British Petroleum's reports that Ukraine's proven coal reserves are under 34 billion tons. Even if we assume that the Russian army still holds 63% of the coal reserves, it turns out that Russia has gained 21.7 billion tons of reserves. Thus, Russia has increased its reserves by 13% by the most conservative estimate. Overall, this is quite a lot. Next, natural gas. All from the same data, we see that Ukraine had a total of 1.1 trillion cubic meters of gas reserves in 2020. Russia had 37.4 trillion. Again, according to conservative estimates, Russia could get 1/5 of it. It means that Russia has gained 220 billion cubic meters, that is, plus 0.6%. In addition, full control of the Sea of Azov has been established. The war party will say that this is a strategically important acquisition, securing the coastline from possible enemies. And finally, the people. After the acquisition, Russia got a few million inhabitants. There's a huge problem with the exact numbers there for obvious reasons. It's not a very stable time for a census. But if we use pro-Russian data, we get a population increase of 6.19 million. That is, the Russian population increased by 4%. But once again, I remind you that all the numbers I mentioned are lower in reality. The data was before the Ukraine's counter-offensive. The borders are changing, people are leaving. But a somewhat rough and exaggerated picture we have is as follows. Russia has gained habitable territories, plus 2.7%. Coal reserves, plus 13.4%. Natural gas, plus 0.6% plus oil and metal reserves. Population, plus 4.2%. In peacetime, there would have been no questions asked. It would have been all the same if this statistic had grown due to the settlement of the Far East and Siberia, new non-prospecting projects, and an increase in the birth rate. But in our case, the price of this growth is different. If, before we listed the pluses, the events which we in the balance sheet attribute to the revenues, now we will talk about the minuses. The event that has been presented to common folk of Russia for several years as a direct threat to the integrity of the Russian Federation, NATO extension, comes to the fore. After the 24th, Finland and Sweden dramatically changed their attitude towards joining the military alliance. The fact is that neutrality used to be very convenient for the Scandinavians. They would really like to both have the cake and eat it. Finland, for example, had at least 3 reasons for remaining neutral. The first, like hell you can make a decision all by yourself in these rotten democracies of yours. The fact is that according to the constitution since 2000, the president no longer has the right to determine foreign policy themselves. Now the government also has a voice, which has complicated the process. The second, Finland understood that joining the alliance would incur the wrath of its large eastern neighbor, so it defined its foreign policy with an eye on the Kremlin. Although most Finnish politicians have tried not to be publicly outraged, there have been some rebels. Back in 2005, for example, the Finnish member of the European Parliament, Ari Vatanen, criticized his government's politeness towards Russia rather harshly.
How is the petite Finnish maid reacting when looking at Russia, where democracy is sadly going down like the Kursk, the Russian submarine that sank in August 2000? If President Vladimir Putin in his actions is a prisoner of his past, we certainly cannot afford to be the same.
And third, NATO is associated with tough American policies, especially after the Iraq War in 2003. Finns did not want to get involved in controversial movements. And then, watch their hands. Officially, Finland did not want to join NATO, but it did send its troops to Bosnia, Kosovo, and Afghanistan to support it. As I said, Finland has taken a very comfortable position. The Kremlin is reassured that Finland is not in NATO, but at the same time, the attitude has remained very close through the Partnership for Peace program and the like. There is also the importance of public opinion polls. The population itself has been against joining the military bloc for more than 20 years. Look for yourselves. Since 1997, people have been expressing themselves against the military alliance. So much so that the percentage of people in favor went from 17 to 32. It did not go any higher. The events of 2014 had very little impact. But then February the 24th happened, and the Finns looked at what was going on and were like,
"Fuck this."
Public opinion has changed diametrically. Finns saw a threat to themselves, not some hypothetical threat. They saw it with their own eyes. And in their eyes, the liberating special military operation looks dangerous. The president says it outright.
I think Finland joining NATO is an act of peace. We want to make sure that there won't ever again be war in Finnish soil by the Russians. So we are joining NATO because of the Article 5 to secure and make sure that we have that support from our allies. And we also have very extensive military forces in Finland compared to the size of the nation. So we are also security providers to other NATO countries.
A similar story happened in Sweden. Here are the population surveys on the screen, where until 2022 the Swedes were happy with neutrality, and then after the 24th the mood changed dramatically. So from the beginning of 2014, where only 28% were in favour of joining NATO, closer to our time we have 64%. And I want to stress that the accession of these countries to NATO is not some coincidence, but a direct consequence of the military actions of the Russian army. And again, this is not my conclusion or opinion. The presidents of these countries are directly talking about it. You have already heard the Finnish one, but here is the speech of the Swedish Prime Minister, posted on the government website.
Europe and Sweden are living in a new and perilous reality. We are facing the greatest tests of defence, foreign and security policy since the Second World War. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine brings about a dramatic and long-term worsened state of security, both in Europe and globally. For Sweden, the war led to a political paradigm shift. From now on, our overall security policy will be coined by greater realism. NATO membership and a heavy rearmament of Swedish defence are an immediate consequence of this insight. The new policy will be coined by clear defence of Swedish national interests. Sweden is now rapidly strengthening its defence. Our defence expenditure will reach the NATO standard of 2% of GDP by 2026. Quality and availability are on the rise. After Russia's attack on Ukraine, the Social Democrats also assumed a pro-NATO position, led by my predecessor Magdalena Andersson. I value that unity. The ability to change position and put the country first in a new situation is commendable.
What Russia has certainly managed to unite is the Swedish parties in their desire to join the enemy bloc. Yes, now the accession process is still under discussion. It is being blocked by Turkey, which is trying to bargain for bonuses. But it doesn't matter. After all, Russia is no longer influencing the NATO enlargement process. Russia's opinion is no longer taken into account. Finland and Sweden used to take Russia's concerns into account, but now, choosing between two evils, they have made their move towards the North Atlantic Military Alliance. Formally, only two countries have not ratified accession, Hungary and Turkey. The others have given their approval. And this historic event was instigated by Russia. Thus, the big motherland is likely to have this new border with the enemy alliance, while the formerly neutral Sweden will further strengthen their own rear, both by its accession and by increasing defence expenditures. And here is what is strange. If Ukraine's possible illusory ascension to NATO was stated as one of the reasons for the war, why is there no similar reaction to Sweden and Finland? Finland is also directly bordering the country, and its accession is no longer illusory, but already at the doorstep. The countries have applied, NATO has accepted the application, and 28 out of 30 countries have already ratified their accession. Ukraine, in this sense, was much further in the accession process prior to February the 24th. So doubts may arise within the patriotic masses in Russia that this war is not actually about NATO enlargement, but about one president's personal attitude towards a particular country and a particular perception of historical justice. It's no surprise that the invasion of Ukraine would be followed by so well known to you cancel culture. Russia is being cancelled worldwide and on a different scale. Since the very start of the war, we've seen quite reactive but not as big actions like some German restaurant no longer serving customers with Russian passports, or Cannes Film Festival no longer welcoming any Russian delegation. Moving to more grand ones, banning Russian teams from participating in the Olympics. On top of all that, there have been restrictions at the state level. Latvia, for example, will revoke all active residence permits previously issued to Russians by the autumn of 2023. And in general, all the Baltic countries have closed borders for Russian citizens, though these states had historical reasons for such a sharp attitude, which we'll tell you about in our further videos, so stay tuned. You can also remember all the businesses that left the Russian market. Despite the scale, all these restrictions affected first and foremost common people of the country. Though eventually the questions about mindlessly cancelling Russia have begun to rise, even forming some rules. I mean exactly as a guide, how to cancel Russia fairly. What's even more surprising about this topic is that Russia is not only being cancelled in the whole world, but also in Russia itself. If you wonder how exactly and for what, firstly by firing people of culture and cancelling concerts for their anti-war stance. From the most striking examples, they've sacked the directors of 3 big theatres basically during one day. They've cancelled plays of notable actors and didn't forget to latch onto their families, firing them from their positions. I'm not going to list all the people who they've branded as traitors to homeland, well, because it will simply take like 2 more videos to complete the list, though the government has created a foreign agent register. Generally, such foreign agents would be entities who are engaged in political activities and receive financial or other support from outside of the country, and to have such a register is quite fine. In Russian reality, though, basically anybody can be certified as a foreign agent. A media outlet, a journalist, a common person, yes, literally the average Joe living next door could become a foreign agent. Funny thing is that they don't have to be engaged in politics at all. Hell, one can get in the list just for earning money from YouTube videos. The absurdity of the situation speaks for itself. 5 to 7 people are regularly added to the register each week. The Ministry of Justice just rolls out the list every Friday like some kind of conveyor belt. And people get to this list mostly, as they call it, for distributing materials created by foreign agents that contradict the country's traditional values, or by speaking out against the special military operation in Ukraine. The message in today's culture in Russia is now that a true patriot of his homeland must be for the war. If you are against it, you are a traitor to the entire country. So it turns out that Russian culture gets rid of everything anti-war while encouraging only the pro-war, including in terms of supporting it financially. The events that we are witnessing now have greatly pumped up Ukrainian nationalism, not to confuse it with Nazism that Putin and other folks have been continuously talking about, denazification, neo-Nazis at the helm of the country and all that. By nationalism, I mean the identification of the individual with the whole nation, with a community united by culture and, importantly, by experience. We go through something similar on a micro level. For example, when I am an employee of Google, I identify with a group of employees. They also identify with me. We have our own unique experience, which is not available for Papa John's workers. Such processes in consciousness at the level of the whole country are called nationalism. Why is everyone in Russia in search of a national idea? Because you can unite around it. That is, you can feel that you belong with a large number of fellow citizens. The Soviet victory over the Nazi Germany in the Great Patriotic War, the conflict fought during the World War II, is used in Russia as a national unifying idea. Well, this is just for an example. Now imagine what is happening to the self-consciousness of a Ukrainian who is experiencing what is happening nowadays. I think most of the world used to call Belarusians and Ukrainians generally Russians. They all speak the same or a similar language, they were recently in the same state, these countries are young for history and nothing much happened there to distinguish them from each other. Until February the 24th of 2022. Now the whole world knows what Ukraine is and how Ukraine is different from Russia. But far more important is that this differentiation is now within every Ukrainian. Now for them, Russians and Ukrainians are not a single nation, not brotherly nations, but at best separate entities from each other. And I am very much holding back in my words, as you can guess. Actually, I wanted to record a video call with a resident of Ukraine and ask how they feel about the Russian world. Many refused for security reasons, and I understand them, but nevertheless I arranged an audio call with Artyom from Zaporozhye.
Артем, есть ли из твоего окружения люди, которые расценивают удары по энергетической инфраструктуре как необходимый шаг для освобождения из-под киевского режима?
Нету. У меня вообще из окружения люди против этого всего.
Как ты вообще видишь киевский режим? Нам часто по телевизору говорят, что освобождают именно от него.
Ну, я, честно говоря, не понимаю, от чего нас освобождают. Ну, то есть, как бы мотивы я понимаю, их, то есть под предлогом типа того, что мы там плохие, все дела. То есть, я так понимаю, правительству России просто нужен повод, чтобы вторгнуться. Ну, тут как бы, я думаю, всем здравомыслящим людям это очевидно. Вот. Но как бы я 4 года последние жил в Киеве, и я могу точно сказать, ни от чего там нас освобождать не надо. Никакого там гнета какого-то, ничего не было абсолютно. Вот.
К слову о гнете. Как твои близкие относились до 24 февраля к русскому языку и как сейчас?
Ну, смотри, я вот, допустим, сейчас тоже, несмотря на то, что я из Украины, общаюсь на русском. Просто такая ситуация, что у нас в Украине, как бы Восточная Украина в основном разговаривают на русском, да, это русскоговорящие, а Западная в основном на украинском. То есть Киев там, я бы сказал, там 50/50. Но в целом я с детства как бы общался на русском. Ну, до сих пор общаюсь, потому что мне это привычно, да. И никто из моего окружения меня не упрекает. Более того, как бы есть люди, которые из-за ситуации как бы, да, перешли на украинский, да, но я как бы многих понимаю. Просто иногда бывает такое, что вот если, допустим, как бы эта ситуация коснулась прямо, там, если бы коснулась меня бы прямо, там, да, не дай бог бы кого-то там бы убили или еще что-то, может быть, у меня тоже как бы больше в сторону там того, чтобы полностью исключить русский язык и все дела. Но в целом как бы люди адекватно к этому относятся. У меня окружение в основном тоже на русском говорит.
То есть пока ты проживал даже последние 4 года в Киеве, угнетания, осуждения за то, что ты использовал русский язык, ты лично не встречал?
Нет. Ну, не было такого. То есть все лояльно относятся. Я даже вот скажу, что у нас на работе, да, вот были такие собрания, да, вот, и часть людей говорили на русском, часть людей на украинском, все друг друга понимали, все с уважением относились как бы.
Well, no nation can have fraternal feelings towards those who deprive you of light and heat in winter. when you are forced to choose shopping centers based on whether they have working generators, when you have to find out that a router can be powered by a laptop, and when you wonder whether you should take your children to the cinema if the alarm is about to sound any second. And I only outlined some mundane circumstances and did not bring up more terrible and tragic events in the video. Even after the mentioned, how do you think the Russian world, the Russian culture, and the Russian language will be treated in Ukraine? Can we fully assess the results of this so-called special military operation and gain for Russia? Not really. At first I thought I would close the whole topic with this video, but then I realized that I had not touched the economy at all. I had not touched demography and emigration. I even had to shorten the first chapter about the territories. But luckily there are no rockets flying at our team, which means we have time and, unfortunately, plenty of material. Write in the comments what else I've forgotten to talk about. Thank you all for watching, and we say special big thanks for all our supporters on Patreon. You know who to share this video with, and I'm the researcher.